Hey, Dave LaCalio, HeadGames Motorworks. Today we are going to discuss GTR heads. We had a little bit of problem here. Heads came in, they're completely destroyed, and we're going to show you all the carnage. Check it out. All right, we're going to start from the top and work our way down. You can see the buckets. Now the GTR, all the Nissan buckets are DLC coded from the factory. That's why they have this like cool looking film on them. They actually offer this in two different ways, two different kinds of DLC. Low oil, bad oil, it doesn't really care. They very rarely wear. And I don't see anything here. You see like a couple little marks on them, but overall, these things are good. But on the side of the bucket, you will see that there is a lot of, it looks like pulling. It could be from the bucket shuttering inside the bucket hole. But you can see there looks like there was some oil starvation because of how the metal is pulled. Like there is actually aluminum still on this. Let's see if you can see that. We'll talk later about why it might shutter. Now for the sides of the bucket, what we'll do is we'll stick it on the lathe and we're going to hit it with some Scotch-Brite to polish up the side of the bucket, and we'll make a decision there after we measure them if they need to be replaced. Moving along here, you can see the oil starvation on the camshafts. This right here, this line here, is pretty pronounced, and you can feel it with this. You can, with this pointer here. This one too is pretty tore up. As I said, you can see there is oil starvation. Now, when I say oil starvation, sometimes that could just be viscosity. And what I mean by viscosity is if this guy ran E85 and he never changes oil, you are going to lose viscosity and the oil will no longer have the correct properties. And all of that will obviously lead to some failures. Cam journals show the same kind of wear. They're not terrible. I think some polishing would help that. But you could definitely see that this thing was running either, it said low on oil or viscosity. I'm going to go with viscosity on this one. All right, and then we're moving on to the valve. Freya's, well, all the tips on the GTRs are very, very small. So as you can see, there is almost no tip to this. And the valves are, and they go down, they neck down here for a 5.5 millimeter lock. So the stem diameter is 6 millimeter, and then they go down to 5.5 millimeter for the stem. And this is OEM GTR. And then the valves, they show somewhere. You can see here, like it looks like somewhere here. From what I understand, wait, hold on, let me show you this. Well, see if you can see this. You see how it's blue up here? That right there is the heat coming all the way up the valve and up the stem. Now, I could be wrong, but some of these guys like to do some flame throwing. And then everybody goes, ooh, ah. And so they do more of it. So Mr. Flamethrowers, we can actually see that you do that without you telling us you do that, just because of how the valves look. And there's a lot of heat in it. Here you'll see there's a little bit of valve float. And it has valve float because whenever you're doing that flame throwing stuff, you're hitting it on the rev limiter, and sometimes it's a hard limiter, and it just creates havoc in the valve train. And when I say havoc, I'm talking nothing will survive it. So here's some things to look at on the intake valve. Now you see this part right here. So this tells me that the valve job wasn't at the right height. When I say not at the right height, it's because if the valve's all the way, or the valve job is all the way in here, it should actually be out here. And what this does is it will make it so the valve is sucked in on the chamber side, which means it would make it so you would have a harder time lashing it. Now, let's pay attention to the margin. When you remember what I said about how we'll suck it in. Well, what they did on some of these is you can tell they refaced the valve until the margin is pretty much razor sharp. And they did that to make up for the difference that they could have made up for getting the valve height correct. Now you have something here, the margin takes heat away from the valve, and now you have no margin. So there's no way it's going to take heat out of that valve. And you're a flamethrower, and we can surmise that the spring height is probably wrong. So all of that together leads to a failure. I want to show you this real quick. Now these are factory, and this had the Faria valve train in it, and the Farias use these locks. Now you'll notice that the lock is longer, right? We can put these two together. Can I do that? Put them two together. So you'll notice that this lock is longer. Now this is a Honda lock from Faria. They've been using this since the early 2000s. The longer lock takes pressure off the tip of the valve, and so you can run more spring pressure. But more importantly, they used it because, well, they have it, right? Also, the groove is different. The groove on the OEM versus the Honda lock is obviously, this is thinner than that one. So I know that's a little hard to see because it's black, and it, you know, putting a light on it's pretty hard, but trust me, the grooves are different. And what that means is if you're going to put a valve train in your head, know that you can actually use like a GSC spring kit with a Faria valve, but you need to be careful because it's not just going to bolt in. You need to check spring height. We should probably do that anyway, but it will change the spring height having a different lock. You absolutely cannot use the OEM lock with the Faria valve and a Faria retainer. Let's take a look at this head. You'll notice what I was talking about. Now, we're actually pretty good. Like, there's no big striations from lack of oil. We definitely did see that. See right here? There is some on this side. And probably oils the exhaust last. But a little polishing would, we could probably zip that up and make it look clean again. If you look inside the bucket holes, you'll notice what I was talking about, the shuttering right here towards the bottom, or the lack of oil, I should say. So it was rubbing right here. During the two-step, or I should say the rev limiter, it's most likely going to just shutter the whole valve train, and you'll get these marks, and obviously not a good thing. In the combustion chamber, it's pretty clean. Now, don't get me wrong, we've already washed it, but you can see how there was oil coming into the intake port, and there was a lot of oil on all inside the chamber, and it goes all the way through the exhaust port. See if you can see here. Like, oil is not going to come all the way up here and fight the forces of exhaust gas to go into the chamber. It's just not possible. So it would have to come from the ring, and it would go through the exhaust port. You can see here it goes through the exhaust port and out the exhaust. So it kind of still going towards, if you have E85 and you have a lot of if you're contaminated the oil, and now the oil, the viscosity is not what it used to be, all the parts are going to get tore up, and especially the ring. So now the ring's not going to seal correctly. You're going to wash the ring down, and then you're going to get oil past it, and it's going to go through the rest of the engine. Let's look at the right head. Holy moly. What has happened here? As you can see, we have a valve seat is no longer, has left the chat, and we have a lot of carnage here. Where'd the carnage come from? So I'm thinking that this went here, and this went here maybe, and that's where the carnage came from, is the valves broke off and went into the cylinder head. And I just want to point out how the one valve that broke, the 45, is all the way to the edge. This thing is razor sharp. Whoever did this, not very bright. I get that there's not a lot there, but you should just replace stuff and or get it to the correct height. Now you see, not all the valves broke, this is a Faria valve, and Farias on normal cases will bend. The only way that you're going to get this to happen is if the valve, if it goes back and forth like this. So it's constantly getting hit and then eventually breaks off the head of the valve. And that is because Faria fuses the valve up here. So anything that happens down here, usually it will just bend it and you don't have to worry about it. For you to do this, you have to work at it. You can see here there's valves, and the brake, you can tell, was definitely like a yawing situation. It took part of the valve guide off with it because the valve guide is cast. So there's two problems here. The first problem is that when you put this Faria valve in a stock guide, that the valve to guide clearance is wrong. And when I say wrong, I mean that the valve to guide clearance is now big. And it's gonna be like a hot dog in a hallway, and you should really put guides in it so that way you make the valve guide clearance correct. The other situation is if you have a high performance car and you have a steel guide, the problem is that they can chip, they can break, they can do a lot of things. Bronze won't do this. So bronze will just wear, or and it very rarely does it wear out, but it won't break off like this and go into your engine. Check out the valve springs. So the valve spring broke as well. And valve springs just don't break. Like, that's not a normal thing. They have to have an issue for it to break. It's just not normal for them just to crack off, right? And a lot of these cracks, you can see, like, they're clean breaks. You can see that? Good try. Toby doing her best here. So you see how it's like a clean break? And then you have other ones like this one. See if you can see that. You see how it's like it leaves a little edge to it? Thank you, Toby, for trying your hardest. So what could cause that is, I said, valve springs don't just break, but they do break from corrosion. And what I noticed here was right near the brake, there's a lot of corrosion here. And you can see it here. The corrosion here will cause a spring to break because it's going to go through the whole material, and it makes sense that it would be on this side, right? So it goes through the material, and what could cause this would be from, say, if the oil is contaminated, E85, you get a lot of moisture in the motor, and now your springs are going to rust and they'll break. The only other thing that can cause a valve spring to break would be control. If it loses control, if the thing is rattling all over the place, if you have valve flow, those are situations where I don't care what spring you have in there, it could break. I've seen it, we've done it, and it's no issue with the manufacturer. It could be the install, and it could be how the customer uses the car. As a flamethrower, which I think this is, and he also doesn't take care of the car, and you have an issue with oil contamination. There's a lot of things that could be. We don't really know the customer. It's a customer of a customer shop, so I don't really know, but we can kind of gander, right? So that's it for me today. I appreciate you guys watching. Like, subscribe, comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Toodles.